Back before my girlfriend Jenny and I officially started dating, we were already great friends. We hung out all the time, exploring shared hobbies and enjoying each other's company. One thing we both loved was snowboarding, and Jenny's family owned a little cabin-style house in Vermont not too far from the Stowe Mountain Resort. It was a cozy retreat nestled high in the mountains, surrounded by thick trees and far away from the bustle of everyday life. Around our 10th hangout, she invited me to join her for a weekend up there to hit the slopes together for the first time. Naturally, I jumped at the chance. What could go wrong in a picturesque winter getaway? The trip began with a 5-hour drive, during which we talked, laughed, and planned our snowboarding adventures. As we approached her little family house, the journey took us deeper into a secluded area of the mountains. The last leg of the drive involved navigating a winding, narrow road that was almost unnervingly isolated. Snow-coated trees lined the road on both sides, their branches heavy with freshly fallen flakes. Driveways to scattered homes broke the monotony of the forest, though many looked unused. Jenny explained that most of these places were vacation homes owned by out-of-state families who rarely visited in the winter. "It's kind of nice," she remarked. "No traffic, no people, just peace and quiet." I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a little eerie, but at the same time, it was beautiful. By the time we reached her cabin, night had fallen. The opening in the trees leading to her driveway was almost invisible, and I only noticed it because Jenny yelled at me to slow down. A narrow trail led us up to the small house, which sat cozily nestled in the snow. It was like something out of a postcard, simple, charming, and enveloped by the wilderness. We parked, hurried inside, and cranked up the heat. The bitter chill quickly retreated as the cabin's warmth enveloped us. The cabin had all the basics: heat, electricity, a small kitchen, and a living area with a television. However, it lacked running water. There were several large jugs of water for necessities like washing hands or dishes, but for other needs, we were directed to an outhouse a few yards away from the cabin. That first night, after dinner, we settled down to watch a movie, The Pursuit of Happiness. I'd say it was the perfect way to unwind after the drive. After the second movie, we both nodded off, the wind outside whispering through the trees as the snow continued to fall. We woke early the next morning, excited for a day on the slopes. Alarms blaring, we dressed quickly, ate breakfast, and gathered our gear. I headed to the outhouse before leaving, not quite ready to try a full day on the mountain with even a hint of discomfort. On my way, I noticed something strange. Fresh footprints, large and indented, traveled in a path that seemed to come from the forest and wrap around the house before disappearing into the woods again. I'd barely opened my mouth to comment when Jenny called out to me. She came outside, looked at the tracks, and shrugged. "Probably a black bear," she said casually. "They're all over the place up here. Just don't leave food outside." Satisfied with her explanation, I took care of my business, and we left for the resort. The day turned out to be amazing. 8 hours on the slopes provided all the adrenaline, excitement, and laughter we could have hoped for. Afterward, we stopped at a small diner to warm up with some comfort food before heading back to the cabin. By the time we returned, the sun was long gone, replaced by a clear night and another gentle snowfall. Despite the chill, it felt peaceful. We spent that evening cozied up by a roaring fire, drinking, laughing, and enjoying some music. Eventually, nature called again, and I knew I'd need to venture out to the outhouse. This time, I decided to get it all over with, both bathroom needs, since I'd already be braving the cold. Slipping on my boots and coat, I ran through the falling snow to the outhouse, relishing the warmth of the cabin on my back as I closed the door behind me. Inside, the wind howled softly, but the blasting music from the cabin filtered through faintly. Everything seemed normal until I heard the crunching sound of footsteps. The noise was unmistakable, slow, deliberate steps in the snow just outside the outhouse. My heart jumped. "Jenny?" I called out, trying to sound calm. No response. The footsteps grew fainter, moving away. I pulled out my phone and tried texting Jenny to see if she was messing with me, but the message didn't send. Reception was practically non-existent this far up in the mountain. After what felt like an eternity, I gathered the courage to leave the outhouse. My phone flashlight cast a dim glow across the untouched snow, except for a fresh pair of tracks leading away from the outhouse and toward the cabin. I hurriedly followed the footprints, my breath catching as I reached the cabin. The lights inside were off. I assumed Jenny had turned them off, but when I banged on the door and called her name, an arm yanked me inside before I could think. It was Jenny. She locked the door immediately, trembling and whispering frantically about a man at the door earlier. "He tried to open it," she said, eyes wide with fear. "I thought it was you at first, but it wasn't. I locked it, cut the power, and hid." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. She explained that she'd seen the man through the window, walking slowly around the house and peering inside. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see a face staring back. Jenny's dad had mentioned a secret cellar in the cabin with a couple of firearms. It seemed extreme at the time, but now we had no choice. Using my flashlight, we located the hidden door in the floor, leading to the small cellar. I climbed down, found a shotgun, and loaded it. My hands shook as I climbed back up and positioned myself by the window. We waited in silence. Jenny sat on the couch, her face pale in the dim flashlight beam. Time crawled by. All we could hear was the snow outside. And then, the footsteps returned. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. Whoever it was hadn't gone far. The steps were slow and deliberate, crunching across the frozen ground. I couldn't see anything beyond the faint reflection of our flashlight on the glass. Gathering what little courage I had, I opened the front door, stepped out, and fired 3 deafening shots into the air. My voice shook as I screamed, daring them to show themselves. The footsteps stopped. The sound of the gunshots echoed into the night, and we waited, holding our breath. Eventually, silence returned. Whoever it was had left, or so we hoped. We didn't sleep that night, instead remaining on high alert until dawn broke. Jenny's father agreed it was best to leave the cabin immediately. The drive back down the mountain was tense. Every so often I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us. We didn't relax until we hit the highway. Looking back, I'm grateful nothing worse happened that night, but the mystery of who that person was and why they were there still lingers in my mind. Despite the perfect day of snowboarding, that weekend remains one of the most chilling experiences of my life. It's a reminder that even in the most serene settings, unease can creep in when you least expect it. I live in England, and for those who reside here, you may remember the heavy snowfall during the winter of 2018. I used to love the snow, but after what happened that year, I've grown to dread it. My immediate family planned to visit extended family in Cornwall for the weekend. I've never gotten along with them well, and the idea of spending a whole weekend there didn't appeal to me. So I faked being ill. Honestly, I didn't expect it to work, but to my surprise it did. My family left without me, leaving me in charge of the house. At 16 years old, I felt completely capable and comfortable staying alone. Saturday was off to a great start. I spent the morning on my computer, watched some Netflix, and even ventured outside to play in the snow with my dog. She loves the snow more than anything. By evening, as the light outside dimmed, I decided it was time to grab some food. I had plenty of food in the house, but most of it required a lot of preparation. So, I decided to go to the fish and chip shop in the village. By now, it was getting dark outside, and although the snow had stopped falling, it was deep. I pulled a 10-pound note out of my wallet, stuffed it into my coat pocket, and bundled up before heading out. The route I usually take to the village involves a tree-lined snicket, or narrow path, with a few scattered street lamps providing faint illumination. From there, the path leads to the main road, where the fish and chip shop is located. When I arrived, it was fully dark. I ordered some chips and a battered sausage, thanked the staff, and started heading home. I clutched my warm meal in one hand and braved the chilly, snow-covered path. Halfway down the snicket, I heard it, the unmistakable snap of a twig to my right. I froze and whipped my head in the direction of the sound, but all I saw was darkness. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was just an animal. I'd only taken a few steps forward when I heard it again, 2 snaps in quick succession, this time closer. My stomach dropped, and a wave of fear surged through me. I began walking faster. Ahead of me lay the last stretch of the snicket, a portion that was almost pitch black due to a street lamp with a blown bulb. The council hadn't fixed it in months, and now it felt like the void ahead was closing in on me. With a sigh of frustration and mounting dread, I quickened my pace. That's when I heard it. The snapping of twigs stopped, replaced by the crunching of boots in the snow. I turned around, and my blood ran cold. Standing under the faint light of the last functional lamp was a shadowy figure. At first it was still, but then it began sprinting toward me. I panicked, dropping all pretenses of calm, and bolted. My legs pounded through the snow as I ran faster than I thought possible. The snicket's entrance was just ahead, and beyond it was the safety of my house. My lungs burned as I fumbled for my keys while running. I didn't dare look back. Reaching my front door, I jammed the key into the lock, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I locked it and peeked through the window. The street outside was empty. The silence was deafening, interrupted only by my ragged breathing and pounding heartbeat. If it had ended there, maybe I could have chalked it up to paranoia or an overactive imagination. But it didn't end there. That night, as paranoia kept me awake, my dog started barking and scratching at the back door. It was just before midnight, and her frantic behavior filled me with dread. Deep down, I knew what she was barking at, but I tried to convince myself otherwise. Reluctantly, I approached the back door. It was too dark outside to see anything, so I flipped the switch for the outdoor light. My heart pounded as I stared into the empty garden. There was nothing there. The snow lay undisturbed, except for my own earlier tracks leading up to the back door. I dragged my dog away and returned to the living room, trying to shake off the unease. Something felt off, though, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Then it hit me. I hadn't used the back door when I came home earlier. I had entered through the front door. A chill ran down my spine, and I could feel cold air on my face. Slowly, I walked back to the door and froze in place. It was wide open. My mind raced as I realized the implications. The layout of my house offered 3 directions upon entering: the living room, the kitchen, or the stairs. As I backed away from the open door, I heard it, a faint but deliberate thump from upstairs. Every instinct told me to leave. I grabbed my dog and my phone and ran to my neighbor's house. I didn't care that it was midnight. I rang their bell repeatedly until they answered. Understandably, they were furious at first, but when I explained what had happened, their anger melted into concern. They let me in, and I immediately called the police. It took the officers 40 minutes to arrive because the snow was falling heavily again. But when they did, they performed a thorough search of the house. To my dismay, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no intruder, nothing. The only clue was captured by a neighbor's CCTV camera. It showed a shadowy figure running out of my back door shortly after I had fled the house, hopping the fence at the end of my garden and disappearing into the woods. The knowledge that someone had been in my house, that they knew where I lived, was horrifying. For weeks after the incident, I struggled to sleep. We installed new locks, additional security cameras, and motion-activated lights, but the sense of safety I'd once felt at home was gone. Even now, years later, the sound of snow crunching underfoot sends a shiver down my spine. It's a harsh reminder that no matter how peaceful a snowfall may seem, it can conceal dangers lurking in the shadows. I'm 27 years old. This happened when I was 26. My mom passed away a few years ago, and my dad is blind. He sold a very successful energy company when I was young, so we have money and multiple properties, which we rent out. Obviously, I have to do my part in helping out given the circumstances. I help manage most of the properties. My dad lives in his 1-story condo about 10 minutes away from us. The condo is within walking distance of the village, which has grocery stores and anything he could need. My sister Katie and I live in the house that we all used to live in together as a family. Our dad gets by himself with basic things like shopping and taking care of himself. But we have to bring him to further away things like doctor visits and whatever he can't walk to. This happened during a winter storm. Katie was at her boyfriend's house, half an hour away from home, so I was home alone. The snow was coming down heavily, and I thought to call my dad and check in on him. He has a landline phone because that's easier for him to use rather than a smartphone. He does have a smartphone, but he's stubborn about using it sometimes. When I called, it rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. So I called again, and the same thing happened. Normally, he would rush to the phone to call back whenever we called, so I waited a few minutes before calling one more time. When I saw he wasn't calling back, I tried again, and once again, it went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back. I called Katie, asking if Dad said anything about going out in this weather. When she said no, he hadn't, that's when I got worried. I didn't like the idea of him being out in a blizzard, so I decided to drive over to his condo. The roads were so bad that there were hardly any cars on the road. My phone kept vibrating, sending winter storm advisory warnings. These were no conditions for my dad to be out walking around in. As I pulled up to his condo, I noticed footsteps in the snow going both ways, indicating he must have gone out and just gotten home. I knocked on the front door and yelled, "Dad, it's me!" A few seconds later, the neighbor's wife, an elderly woman named Hannah Laura, opened her door. She smiled and told me her husband had just given my dad a lift to the store a few minutes ago. We talked for a moment, then I thanked her as she closed her door. I figured I might as well let myself into my dad's condo to wait since I was already there. Naturally, before looking for my key, I tried twisting the doorknob, and to my disappointment, it opened. The door wasn't locked. My dad didn't lock the door again. I've told him so many times to stop doing this, because one day someone might break in, even though we live in a nice area. I shut the door behind me, but then I noticed something peculiar. There were melted snow tracks on the wood floor leading past the living room to the little hallway, which leads to my dad's room. "Dad?" I called out. Had he just gotten home right before I arrived? But that wouldn't explain Hannah Laura's husband not having returned yet. Well, maybe it could have. Maybe he dropped my dad off and then ran his own errands. These were the thoughts running through my mind as I slowly followed the tracks. I called out again, louder this time, "Dad!" Still no answer. I didn't hear the shower running, so why wouldn't he be able to hear me? Something wasn't right. He would have answered. I started calling my dad's cell number, and I heard it vibrating in the bedroom down the hall. Relief flooded through me. Maybe he was home. I walked down the hall into my dad's empty room. He wasn't there. I saw his phone vibrating on the nightstand next to his bed. I looked at the ground and saw the melted snow tracks led to his bathroom, the door of which was closed. I went over and knocked. "Dad?" I asked one final time. No response. I slowly opened the door. The bathroom was empty. However, something unusual caught my eye right away: the shower curtain. It was pulled shut. My dad always leaves the shower curtain open. I know this for a fact. On top of that, the bathroom door being shut was also unusual. He leaves all doors open to make navigating easier for himself. I looked at the shower curtain for a moment, then turned and left the bathroom. My instincts told me to walk to the front of the condo, shut the door, and call. I didn't want to risk investigating further alone. I waited at the front entrance, the only way in or out. To my surprise, the police arrived quickly given the stormy conditions. When we went back inside together, we headed straight for my dad's room. To our astonishment, a man was sitting on the bed with his hands raised in the air, as if he had been waiting for us to arrive. He didn't resist when officers detained him. My dad got home about 10 minutes later and was shocked to hear everything that had happened. The intruder, as it turned out, lived a few units down according to his ID. This meant the man had likely been keeping an eye on my dad and his condo for some time, planning to break in and rob him. That's when the phrase "rob him blind" really hit me hard. Being the kind soul he is, my dad initially didn't want to press charges, but after some persuasion, Katie and I convinced him to hire a lawyer and move forward with the case. The man was charged with third-degree burglary. He's still in jail to this day. Since then, we've installed more security measures at the condo, and I'm extra cautious about keeping an eye on my dad. While he has always been independent, this experience was a wake-up call for all of us.